What I've argued for a long time as it relates to Epstein is that, there's been a pretty much exclusive focus on his sex crimes, but not his financial crimes. Epstein was a guy that, obviously the media narrative since his arrest and his death has tried to frame him as a great Gatsby kind of figure. He was all talk and just a charlatan and this and that. No, he was kept around by elite figures because he was very good at helping them evade taxes and was very good at money laundering and had a very, very intimate knowledge of the offshore banking system, where a lot of these families historically hide their money. So, like the Pritzker family, for example, have early ties to organized crime going back to like the 20s and 30s, and they were one of the main clients early on of Castle Bank, which brings together some organized crime-linked figures.
Whitney Webb highlights that while Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes dominate the headlines, his financial crimes remain largely overlooked. Epstein, portrayed by media as a great Gatsby figure, was actually a skilled money launderer and tax evasion expert who managed wealth for elite families through offshore banking network. Families like the Pritzkers, with historical ties to organized crime, were among his early clients. His financial dealings, concealed by the sensationalism of the sex scandal, reveal a deeper network of corruption involving prominent figures and institutions. Webb questions the FBI's selective investigations, such as ignoring Epstein's Zorro Ranch and delaying the raid on his island. She also scrutinizes the suppression of key cases, like J.P. Morgan's involvement in Epstein's activities, which implicated figures like Elon Musk and Google's founders. Settlements and downplayed document releases have shielded powerful individuals and their financial dealings from public scrutiny, suggesting systemic protection of the elite. Ultimately, Webb argues that the focus on Epstein's personal crimes distracts from the broader financial systems he operated within. These systems connect powerful families, corporations, and political figures, protecting their illicit wealth and influence. She calls for accountability, not just for Epstein's direct actions but for the networks and institutions that enabled him.
Sure. So, obviously there was that big, highly publicized release of what was said to be phase one of the Epstein files, with a lot of, Twitter influencers and other figures given these binders. And obviously that didn't go over, I think, the way they anticipated it would, mainly because, the files themselves didn't really had been heavily hyped. Including, among pro-Trump media figures, and then obviously the documents therein, most of which had been previously released and made publicly available, didn't live up to the hype. And then there was this effort to sort of say that, oh, well, Pam Bondi didn't have all the documents, and it was this one office that was sort of withholding them. And so, supposedly FBI agents have been digging through them with the plans to release them. But then some of these figures that had promoted the Epstein releases previously in media, like Megyn Kelly, came out and said, oh, well, as I understand it, these documents aren't really the bombshells. There's not really anything explosive in there. So there's been sort of this effort to, on the one hand, claim that more is to come, and then also downplay the significance of what will come out later. And as I understand it, the claims that were made about what the documents that were being allegedly withheld were related to documents generated by the FBI upon their raiding of Epstein's property in New York City in 2019. I have a few thoughts about that. One is it would be nice if the FBI would explain why Epstein's other residences were not raided, like the Zorro Ranch property in New Mexico, never raided. And then why, it took them a month to get to the island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James. Be nice to know that. And of course, some of arguably some very important documents, I believe, could be obtained by the Department of Justice that are held not by the FBI, but the U.S. Virgin Islands, because there was this case involving the U.S. Virgin Islands and J.P. Morgan as it related to Epstein. And that case got settled out of court, so it didn't go to trial. But I believe those documents would be very, very, very telling. But I would argue the reason they won't come out is because one of the people subpoenaed as part of that investigation was Elon Musk. He wasn't necessarily accused of wrongdoing, but was subpoenaed because he was suspected of having had some sort of involvement with Epstein and JP Morgan. And there are allegations, of course, not really allegations, but, it was reported, before Musk was closely affiliated with Trump, that Epstein had been advising Tesla and was part of this effort in 2018 to take Tesla private with Gulf oil money or Saudi money. And at the time, Epstein was advising Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and was also known to have a close relationship with the elite families of the United Arab Emirates, and also Kuwait, and I think Bahrain as well. So perhaps they don't want to have that really be explored at this point. But some of the other figures that were subpoenaed and accused of wrongdoing, because in the case of the USVI case, it was specifically that JP Morgan's accounts with Epstein and relationship with Epstein was connected to the human trafficking, sex trafficking. And so you have people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin of Google, the Google co-founders, being subpoenaed as part of that. You have Tom Pritzker of Hyatt Hotels being subpoenaed. And of course, the Pritzkers are a very powerful family in Chicago, specifically very connected, for example, to the rise of Barack Obama as a politician, but also a lot of prominent think tanks like the Carnegie Endowment run by a Pritzker. And I think Tom Pritzker, who was subpoenaed here, ran for a long time or was chairman of the board of CSIS, which is one of these very national security adjacent think tanks with a lot of influence on U.S. national security policy. So probably people that can afford to be sort of left out of the limelight, I guess, because a lot of, what I've argued for a long time as it relates to Epstein is that, there's been a pretty much exclusive focus on his sex crimes, but not his financial crimes. Epstein was a guy that, obviously the media narrative since his arrest and his death has tried to frame him as a great Gatsby kind of figure. He was all talk and just a charlatan and this and that. No, he was kept around by elite figures because he was very good at helping them evade taxes and was very good at money laundering and had a very, very intimate knowledge of the offshore banking system, where a lot of these families historically hide their money. So like the Pritzker family, for example, have early ties to organized crime going back to like the 20s and 30s. And they were one of the main clients early on of Castle Bank, which brings together some organized crime linked figures. And also the CIA through Paul Hellawell, who was a CIA banker that helped set it up. And, it helped launder money for organized crime interests and also some of these families like the Pritzkers who later became very politically powerful. So
Whitney Webb argues that the focus on Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes has overshadowed his role in facilitating corruption through global financial network. His ties to elite families, like the Pritzkers and institutions such as JP Morgan, reveal a system of money laundering, tax evasion, and privilege that protects the powerful. Webb highlights how systemic failures, including delayed FBI actions and suppressed investigations, shielded influential figures connected to Epstein. She warns that this focus on personal scandals distracts from addressing the broader network of corruption that enables elite impunity and demands systemic reform.
Penny Pritzker was Obama's Secretary of Commerce, right. And the Pritzkers and the Crowns, who, Lester Crown was part of the mega group that we talked about earlier, and the Crown family, going back to Henry Crown, have extensive organized crime ties as well. They sort of helped Barack Obama's early career, for example, and sort of helped propel him to the presidency, and first as a senator, right? But sort of, have a lot of influence on Democratic politics in Chicago in particular. So it's really not surprising that you'd have a Pritzker be governor there. But they're quite a powerful and influential family. It doesn't really get talked about a lot. And speaking of the Crowns, on the board of JP Morgan for a long time was James Crown, Lester Crown's son, who, along with banking interests in Ohio, intimately tied to Leslie Wexner, basically had created modern-day J.P. Morgan with Jamie Dimon at the helm. They're totally responsible for Jamie Dimon being in charge of that bank, namely Crown, and also this guy named John Kessler, who, is just as much a Leslie Wexner henchman as Epstein was, and was intimately involved with Epstein as well. So, those are the people that put Jamie Dimon in charge. Arguably, that explains why why Epstein and JP Morgan had such a close relationship. And I think they just couldn't have that case go to court. So Pam Bondi could get a lot of that information if she wanted to, but I don't think there's any interest in exploring that.
What about Megyn Kelly? You said that are you saying that she was downplaying it, or are you saying she was just reporting on.
Yeah, well, I don't regularly watch her show. I want to make that very clear, full disclosure. But I was shown a clip that had been posted on Twitter of her subsequently after the first release, saying that it was her understanding that the documents that were allegedly being sifted through after the phase one release were not really as significant as some had been led to believe. There's also this claim that gets circulated a lot that there's like a client list the FBI is sitting on, and it's really doubtful as to whether or not that actually exists or not. So, the idea of the client list is like, who did Epstein film and who is compromised? Will that come out? And, we pretty much can look at a few names of who were likely the people that were compromised, but I don't think that's any substitute for going after the people who sponsored the compromising, right? Because obviously they're the ones trying to control the people who were compromised for their benefit. So you should absolutely look at that. And so, I think this is just kind of an effort to, make it appear like there's transparency when there really isn't as much transparency as people are being led to believe. And also, transparency in this case is no substitute for investigating and prosecuting people who absolutely should be targeted, like Leslie Wexner. Right. And his, business empire that Epstein helped build, Epstein's relationship with Bear Stearns, which arguably helped set off the 2008 financial crisis, absolutely should be scrutinized. It has not. His relationship with JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, obviously the JP Morgan one was covered up because they settled out of court and kept all the information from coming out in court. And then also there's the case of, Epstein in the Deutsche Bank case, where, one of the judge overseeing it, her son was murdered as she was about to start overseeing that case. And then no one reports on it, and then it settles out of court as well. Obviously, I think there is some stuff there with the money flows that is a big problem for both parties. And so even though you think it would be politically expedient, for the Trump administration, to report on, Tom Pritzker or something like that, since his family's so tied to like the Obama network or whatever, it's not going to happen, because you pull on some of that and it just airs out too much dirty laundry of the whole system that absolutely involves both parties. And also, there's the case too that the Trump administration could have put out information related to Epstein's White House visits during the Clinton administration, which you think, again, would be politically expedient for the Trump administration, but there's no way they'll touch that. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's related to this, there was arms trafficking and all sorts of other crazy things going on with, a lot of people that had previously been involved in the Iran-Contra network. And, Trump world has ties to that. So I don't think they'd be interested in having that come out. But it would be very nice if they did. But there's plenty of aspects of the Epstein case that could easily be obtained by Pam Bondi and released, and they won't.
Whitney Webb sheds light on how the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, while heavily focused on his personal crimes, reveals a much deeper problem within global financial and political systems. She emphasizes that Epstein was not just a lone predator but a key player in a larger network of corruption, involving prominent institutions and elite. By exploring his connections to powerful families and corporations, Webb argues that these networks enable money laundering, tax evasion, and other financial crimes, shielding the wealthy from accountability. Webb's work urges us to look beyond the salacious headlines and examine the systemic failures that allowed Epstein's operations to thrive. From the complicity of financial institutions to the suppression of key investigations, the case serves as a chilling reminder of the pervasive influence of elite impunity. To truly address these issues, society must confront the broader systems of corruption that enable such abuses. What are your thoughts on the role of media in shaping public perception of cases like Jeffrey Epstein's? How can society work toward dismantling the systems that protect elite corruption?